Hey everybody, welcome back to Auto Scholar with Mr. B. I'm Mr. B, and today we are talking about the Toyota Prius. So, since I've been working on my hybrid curriculum with a lot of my students, I've noticed that just in general, most people don't know a whole lot about the Prius. And so I put together part of my curriculum, and this is part of it. So I'm going to share it with people that are actively working with these vehicles, or owners or enthusiasts. Anybody that wants to watch this is fine. It is kind of set up for a professional technician. However, even if you're an owner of one of these vehicles, you should be able to get some good information from it. So let's go ahead and get started. So the purpose is to familiarize yourself with the different generations of the Prius, learn basic safety rules for high voltage systems, differences in technology from traditional vehicles, because they are very different. And of course, if we have difference in technology, we're going to have a different way of diagnosing these vehicles, which I'll give you a couple of strategies and tips moving forward to where it's a little bit easier to understand and find problems with these vehicles. So let's start with the Prius prototype. So this was the G21 project, which is a project that Toyota put together in Japan. And it was envisioned in 1993. They got the group of folks together and started brainstorming. And then about 1994 is when the work began on this project. So the prototype used a large capacitor instead of a battery. So it has just this big capacitor, and that's what it ran on instead of a multi-bank battery that we're used to. So they were having a lot of problems with these cars and had a lot of, bench explosions and a lot of just technical errors because, this hadn't really been done before the way they were trying to do it. And they finally got a car to run, and it took 49 days for them to go 500 meters. The amazing thing is they got this figured out fairly quickly, and within 2 years, the first generation Prius was in production. So they worked out all the bugs, and of course, the Prius just keeps getting better and better as the years go by. So let's talk about the first generation. So the NHW10 is what came out first, and that's pictured above here, the silver car pictured above. You notice it looks a little bit different than the NHW11, but this was first sold in Japan, strictly Japan, from 1997 to 2000, and there was 37,435 produced. And this was a test market for the Prius, and everybody seemed to love it. So they came back with the NHW11, which is a little bit more of a polished look, and it's probably the first generation Prius that you've seen out on the road. And they made 123,000 of these. The body's based on the Toyota Echo, and they used D-type cells in the 10, and the 11 was the first Prius to use the prismatic cells that we're kind of used to today, those nickel metal hydride prismatic cells. And this one right here, AC compressor was just normal, did not have the electric compressor like the later Prius did, and we had electric power steering, but for the most part, there wasn't too much outside of the drivetrain that was unconventional with these cars. We had the problems with these cars, battery failures due to overheating and, of course, electrolyte leakage, which is, still a problem today. We had MG2 stators fail due to shorting, and then they would overheat. So that would normally cause, replacement of the transmission, or at least a replacement stator for the MG2. Most people just replace the transmission. We did have sticky throttles due to the throttle body contamination. That would cause the throttle to stick. So, if you get that problem, you definitely want to check the throttle and make sure it's good and clean. And of course, power steering system failure due to internal electronic issues. So we did have a lot of electronic system for the power steering fail for those. So those are the common problems. And moving on here to the Generation 2 Prius. Okay, so a lot of people think this is the best Prius they've ever made. And there's a lot of argument for that here. So this is the XW20 Prius, made from 2003 to 2009 for Japan, started in 2004 for the rest of the world. So again, you'll find that Toyota is going to use their domestic base as a sounding board on this new stuff. This was definitely a more polished Prius. Sold 1,192 vehicles sold worldwide. And if you go to the boards, these vehicles are everywhere. I see them in every country. And so it was just a kind of an international hit. They got bigger, so much larger than the Gen 1. And also, this is where we see the hatchback form start. The first generation was just a sedan. This is the hatchback form. And this is where we got the Prius shape that has stuck with us for such a long time. More powerful engine, which it desperately needed. The Generation 1 was a very slow, asthmatic vehicle. We got powerful MGs too, so our motor generators became more and more powerful as well. Everything got a little bit bigger. The battery was smaller and lighter. Of course, got better cooling systems to deal with the cooling problems that was plaguing the first generation. On the Gen 2, we got the first electric AC compressor. Okay, and so we'll go a little bit deeper into the AC later. But very common today, still being serviced. I still see these all over the road in different and varying conditions. Some are like perfect. Others are, barely hanging in there. Most of them had, paint issues and things like that, like most Toyotas in the mid 2000s. Not uncommon to see these cars with 400,000 miles on them. They still run them up and down New York all day for taxis. 48 miles to the gallon for city and 45 highway. So you'll notice this is a trend that the city mileage is going to be better than the highway mileage. And that's because we have regenerative braking. We stop more in the city, so we'll be charging up the battery more in the city than we would be on the highway. And this car just really solidified Toyota in the hybrid market. This really made them the hybrid people. You had other people with hybrids as well. You had Honda and you had a couple Ford and people like that. But for the most part, Toyota took the crown as far as hybrids go, and they did it with the Gen 2 Prius. So common problems with Gen 2, you had a lot of brake actuator internal failure rates. I mean, just very, very common to have brake actuator failures on the Gen 2. And I actually have a video on Auto Scholar Mr. B YouTube channel. If you have a Gen 2 and you have a brake actuator that's failed, I have a video for you up there. Accumulator leak codes, things like that, pumps burning out. You'll just see a lot of problems with those. Instrument cluster failures due to a faulty capacitor. And this is really funny because this is about a 10-cent part that fails in these instrument clusters. And, most people would just replace the cluster, but then someone figured out that you could get this 10-cent piece and resolder it in, and it's just a capacitor. And that fixes your, anywhere, I've seen quotes $500 to $800 for this part. And you can fix it with a 10-cent capacitor you can buy on Amazon and a soldering iron. So did have oil consumption issues with these, just the nature of the beast. Hybrids are going to use more oil because they crank up and turn off so much. But there are cases out there where, it's an excessive amount of oil being ate up by these engines. And the only way you can really fix it is by, of course, cleaning the PCV system to see and make sure that's okay, but replacing rings and valve stem seals and stuff like that are kind of, the only way you can fix it. Most people just go ahead and get a new engine and put in there. Traction battery failure. I find this pretty common with Gen 2s just because they're getting older. The last Gen 2 was made in 2009, so we've got over 10 years on all of those. The traction batteries just fail over time. The inverter cooling pump on these fail all the time. Also, I recommend using a Toyota part to replace that because the aftermarkets have been known to fail, short out, and cause issues with these cars. Fuel pump is made into the gas tank and has to be replaced as a unit. So inside this gas tank of the Gen 2s is a rubber bladder, and it has a fuel pump built into this bladder. We see problems a lot of times with the gas gauge reading wrong, and there's a recalibration on that you can find on YouTube. But a lot of times the bladder will collapse and will no longer be able to hold fuel. And so you won't be able to put as much fuel in it as the car should take. And also, if your fuel pump goes bad, anything goes bad, you have to replace the gas tank. And, I've seen them go anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for a new gas tank for these. So just keep that in mind. If you have a car that has a bad fuel pump, that's normally a $100 problem on any other vehicle. But this, with having to replace the gas tank, it is an extra cost. Gen 3, okay? Gen 3's XW30 Prius. And it was produced from 2010 to 2015 with 1,688,000 units produced, okay? Prius C is also produced as a smaller alternative and is based off the Yaris. It's the smaller, tinier car. Then we also got the Prius V Wagon, much larger cargo area. This is more like your station wagon. Sometimes they're called a station wagon. Kind of look SUV-ish, kind of like a Mazda 5 or something like that. Larger engine, smaller and lighter transmission, and of course, that brings increased efficiency. So the car just more or less got, more efficient. And you'll see this about 10%. The Prius miles per gallon and stuff will be about 10% higher every generation we go. The all-wheel discs are going to replace the disc drum setup. So we have discs all the way around, no more drum brakes in the back like we did with the Gen 2. 51 miles per gallon city, and of course 48 miles per gallon highway. You'll always get lower highway, as we discussed on the previous model. So this is the Prius C right here. It's just the smaller version. A lot of people, don't care for those. They're just not as roomy. We got a new 1.8 liter engine, and there's absolutely not a single serpentine belt on that engine. So no belts at all. We got an electric water pump that runs off the 12-volt system. On the inside, we got plant-based plastics used in the interior construction. So, a few things you'll never find inside a Prius are leather. They don't use much leather in these cars. They don't use any animal products or anything like that. And so for most people that buy these cars, they're more ecological friendly or green, and they like to see things like this in their cars, and Toyota reciprocates. Now, what that means for longevity, I don't know if those plastics are going to hold up over the long run, but I guess that's one thing that we can see, kind of time will tell on that. Smaller inverter. We got a smaller inverter, and that was for weight reduction. And we have newer ADAS systems, such as lane assist, radar cruise, and pre-collision avoidance on the later Gen 3 models. Of course, those are the higher trim lines as well, so you won't find that on the Prius 1 or 2. I think it's Prius 4 and above. Common problems, we're starting to see some recurring problems with just the Prius name itself. Head gasket failures due to fluctuating engine temperatures. And I'm hearing that Toyota now makes a newer head gasket for these that won't cause so much problems like the older one does. But mostly everybody I know uses the Felpro replacement for the head gasket. And of course, new head bolts and everything as well. When you're replacing that head gasket, get the head checked for any cracks. Massive recalls for sticking throttles. And I don't know if you remember this, but back in the day when these came out, that's right when the Toyota throttle sticking problems really started happening. So there was massive recalls on that. Brake actuator failures, just like the Gen 2, the Gen 3s will fail. Normally it's accumulator leak down problem. And you'll have to replace two parts, replace the booster and the motor. And of course, I have a video available on Auto Scholar with Mr. B for that as well. The thumbnail looks like the picture to the left if you're looking for it. Inverter failures. We did have a lot of inverter failures and battery failures. Inverter, a lot of times they failed because the inverter coolant pump failed and it overheated the inverter, but sometimes they just went out on their own. There was I believe a warranty, some type of extension for that. Battery failures, they pretty much use the same battery as the Gen 2s. So they failed the same way and they're failing left and right now that they've got a little age on them. We did see EGR cooler and passageway clogging on these cars a lot. You would have to take the EGR cooler and soak it, get all the soot out of it, or you would end up with misfires and codes and things like that inside the car. And of course, we had headlight bulb issues. Headlights burned out left and right on these. I don't know if they just got a huge bad batch of them or whatnot, but normally we see headlights burn out quicker on these cars than its predecessors or its successors. So Generation 4 is our current generation. It is a XW50. It was first produced in 2016 and is ongoing. So there's not a whole lot of data out for these because they're so new. Majority of these cars are still in warranty. Of course, we got the introduction of the plug-in Prius Prime. Prius Prime was considered an electric vehicle, still available, I believe, for tax breaks. This was one you could charge up and drive it for a few miles before the engine ever came on in the car. Lithium batteries on these, we moved from that nickel metal hydride to lithium, except in the all-wheel drive e-models. So they found that most of these all-wheel drive Priuses were bought by people that were in more extreme temperatures, either cold or hot, and the lithium just didn't keep up in those areas. So if you have a AWDE model, you have the old nickel metal hydride battery in there. They chose to put that in there just because it's safer under temperature and it lasts long under extreme heat and cold. So a little bit smaller than the Gen 3 and 2, and it has a smaller motor generator setup, but it is more powerful. So As we see, we get another bump in fuel economy, 65 miles per gallon city, 60 miles per gallon highway. And that's a fantastic mileage for any car, but this is kind of the pinnacle of miles per gallon for the Prius. Lower center of gravity in this car. So this car got a little bit more aggressive with the Gen 4, more aerodynamic than the previous models. We have 100% LED lighting, and that's to save power. The less power I use on the 12-volt side, the less power I'm using out of my high voltage side. And I got a full color instrument cluster finally. That should have been done a long time ago, but we got it in 2016. It almost looks like a Tesla style setup in the center there. We have less storage in the interior. And one thing that the Prius is really good at is storage. It has, 2 glove boxes in some models and a lot of pockets and things like that to put things in. And on this one, we got rid of a lot of that stuff. Better handling suspension and slightly lower to the ground. And that gives you just a little bit sportier of a feel. I would never call a Prius sporty, but the Gen 4s have done a lot for just the feel of driving a Prius. Common problems, okay, there's not many common problems yet because it's still a new car. So until we get a lot of these, over 100,000 miles, we're really not going to know 100% what's going on with these cars and what problems are trending with them. But 16 through 18 models recalled for shorts in the engine wiring harness that could lead to fires. So if you have a 16 or through 18, definitely next time you're near the dealership, stop in and see if you have that recall. There is a Bluetooth echo problem while you're using hands-free function with a phone call. And this is not limited to the Prius. This seems to be a Toyota problem because I do hear other people, Tundra, Tacoma, people complain about the Bluetooth problem with Toyota themselves. So parking brake recall for 2016 through 17 Prius models, 340,000 worldwide. And of course, this isn't a Toyota problem. This is a everybody problem. Soy-based wire insulation can attract rodents, not limited to the Prius. Okay, so they coat these wires with a soy-based insulation, and the critters love that. And so they chew through your wires, causing electrical problems. And I don't think we want to talk about how big of a problem it would be with some of these really spicy wires running through here get chewed through. So keep that in mind. You may want to get you a cat if you keep your car outside. All right, hybrid safety. This is very important. With a hybrid vehicle, it does have enough voltage to penetrate human skin and cause death. So it's very rare for anything to happen with hybrid or electric vehicles, but there is always a possibility. So we have to act like circuits are live until we know they're not. So protective gear must be worn when unsure if voltage is present. Remove the high voltage safety plug and wait 10 minutes before repair work. And that's pretty much anything more than an oil change. I'm going to remove this plug. Okay. If I'm doing brakes, if I'm doing tune up, anything to the engine wise outside of an oil change, and I would remove this plug here. And you want to secure the key away from the vehicle and others. You don't want anybody walking up and being able to start the car up when you have panels and everything open. So I normally what I do if I've got a Prius in, I will take the key and the safety plug and I will walk it to my office and lock it in my desk. We always test for voltage before touching open components. So if I have an open battery, if I have an open inverter, if I have wires off, testing for anything particular, I'm going to test for voltage before I put my ungloved fingers on them, okay? In ready mode, the engine can start at any moment. So if you see ready on that dash, that engine can start any minute. So keep your hands and tools and everything out of the engine compartment if your ready light is on. And of course, disconnect the 12-volt battery off to the side if you're doing any major repair work. The battery contactor is 12-volt powered. So if the 12-volt battery is removed, then we don't have any possibility of that contactor contacting unless we have a mechanical failure, which is very rare on these. Things missing from the Prius. So because we have so much added technology, we also lose a few things as well. First things first, what's got to go? The starter and the alternator. So these cars do not have starters or alternators. Okay, that's handled by MG1, motor generator 1 in the transmission. Engine starting is completed by MG1 and the traction battery. So the traction battery sends power to MG1. MG1 will spin the engine over, and combustion starts, and that's how that works. Alternators not needed due to MG1 and MG2 creating power through generation. So MG1 is going to be creating power through, of course, the engine turning, and MG2 is going to be creating power through regeneration by braking and coasting. Generates power by ICE operation and by coasting and braking. And of course, high voltage AC is converted to low voltage DC to provide traditional 12-volt systems to accessories and 12-volt batteries. So we're providing 12 volts to everything else through our inverter, not an alternator. What else are we missing? We're missing power steering pump, and it's replaced with electric rack and pinion. This is an electric-powered motor. It looks like a really big window motor. This allows variable power assist in all situations. Of course, this is powered by the 12-volt system. So some electric cars are powered by the higher voltage system, but the Prius is powered by the 12-volt system, just like a regular ICE engine with electric rack. No Prius has a traditional vacuum brake booster. That's right. We don't generate vacuum when our engine's not on, so we don't use a vacuum booster. There is no mechanical connection from the pedal to the brake system. So there's no master cylinder per se that provides power from my foot to the brakes. It is all modulated by the brake actuator. Okay. The brake feeling that we get is from a stroke simulator. So we are creatures of habit, and when we put our foot on the brakes, we expect it to feel the same way, a certain way that we've pretty much had our whole driving experience. So we have to simulate that, and we do that with a stroke simulator. When pressing the brake pedal, the car may use the friction brakes, resistance from MG2 in generation mode, or a combination of both, just depending on how the car is slowing down, depending on how heavily charged the battery is. If the battery is charged all the way up, I don't want to regen any more power, so I may lean more on my friction brakes than I do my regenerative brakes. So all this is controlled by a brake actuator system, and of course, a computer is going to control this all as well. It's not rare to see factory brake pads and rotors on a car with over 150,000 miles. I've seen them go 200,000 miles without needing brake pads or rotors, but you still need to inspect them, especially if you live up north. The brakes can literally rust away before the pads wear out. So definitely check your brakes for any rust and any corrosion. HVAC differences. Okay, Gen 1 Prius had a traditional belt-driven compressor, and you just service as usual, just like you would like a Camry or Corolla. It uses regular PAG oil, nothing to worry about. But Gen 2 and 3 and 4 Priuses have an electric compressor powered by the high-voltage battery. Electrical compressors do not use PAG oil. Okay, if you put PAG oil in an electric compressor, you need to flush the system out. And that's due to PAG oil's ability to absorb moisture. So if I have moisture in my oil, it can conduct electricity and cause a high voltage leak. So we use a India 11 oil for this, and that will not suck up the water out of the air or the humidity and cause any voltage leaks. If my compressor goes bad, it could leak high voltage to the compressor case if it's not insulated by this oil here. So all Prius models use automatic climate control, has some type of climate control here. Some models have a button on the control panel that provides extra filtration for a 3-minute period. And this is normally, right next to the AC button. You see I have a red box around it here. And what this does is it turns the fan to high, it goes to recirculate, and it takes every bit of air out of the car and it recirculates it through the cabin air filter. And it gives you kind of a fresher feel of the car. Some models also have a plasma cluster, and it should say plasma cluster on the dash of the car if it does have one of these. It has an ion generator in the driver's side vent that provides ionized cabin air for a fresher feeling in the cabin. So it works like an ionizing air cleaner. And this is pointed kind of towards the driver. This is only on, I think, the Prius 4 and 5 models. So very high trim level Priuses here. Faulty compressors can fill the AC system with metal particles, which require the replacement of the entire AC system. So this is pretty common nowadays. When these compressors go bad, they go bad and stuff gets all through the system. So you may have to replace the entire AC system in this car if the compressor goes bad. Electric compressors are also variable, so only take a pressure reading when the compressor is operating at 100%. And look at my scan tool and see the duty cycle of the compressor. And because if it's operating at 50% like it's supposed to, then my readings are going to be off. So whenever I got my gauges on the car, I should be, at 100%. And then you can pretty much diagnose it just like anything else. So Generation 2 compressors have 3 power wires because they are 3-phase. So it gets a three-phase voltage from the inverter. And since our battery is direct current, it has to, change to that 3-phase through the inverter and get sent down to the compressor via 3 different wires. So Generation 3 compressors are 2-wire and use a nominal 201 voltage directly from the battery. So that's direct current directly from the battery. The electric compressors are also scroll compressors and operate at variable speeds needed to provide cooling at the exact need. So I can spin this up or I can slow it down depending on evaporator temperature and customer demand, or driver demand, I guess you could say. And so if the customer's really wanting it cold, I can put that compressor at 100%. But if not, I can slow that compressor down. And of course, this is going to make the system more efficient by using less electricity. Heating is managed through a traditional heater core with supplemental electric heating elements. So the electric elements help maintain cabin temperature when the engine is off or not warmed up yet. Engine uses electric water pump in some models to keep the water flowing. This is Gen 3 up. You'll have electric pump. You also have electric inverter pumps and everything on the cooling system, but those don't intermingle with the pump that provides heat to the cabin. So Gen 2 models also have a thermostyle reservoir, and you see at the bottom right here in this picture, it looks like a can, a little bit bigger than an oil filter there, and it keeps the cooling system warm. So this keeps the system warm, and you need to be careful when you're removing the radiator cap on these cars. I mean, even hours after you shut the cars off, they'll still be warm in there, and the cooling system will still be warm because of this coolant storage tank. So the Prime HVAC system uses an electric heat pump to heat and cool the cabin. It's 63%, uses 63% less energy than the previous units. Okay, the system will be used in Toyota's new electric vehicle lineup and was developed by Denso. So I think they're pretty much just using this Prius Prime as a test bed for this new system. There's not a whole lot of aftermarket information available on this system yet, but just know that it works like a heat pump. It'll have a reversing valve of some type to reverse the flow of refrigerant, and that is going to heat or cool the car depending on the flow of the refrigerant. If you're familiar with your heat pump at the house, it works the same way. Everything's just scaled down and it's very small. Diagnostic strategies, okay? This is kind of where the rubber meets the road. We used to be very scared of these cars before we figured them out, and I'm here to help you figure them out. So do not be scared of these cars, okay? High-level scan tool or TechStream software is a must for diagnostics, functions, and special procedures. You are not going to get anywhere with just a code reading software, okay? You have to get in there and have some functionality to your scan tool, or you can use TechStream and a laptop. You're going to want to put the codes out of every system in the car because there may be a code in a subsystem that directly affects another system because these systems are so intertwined that you just need to pull every bit of information out of the car that you can find. I normally find that it helps that if I divide the car into sections, okay, and then just conquer each section at a time. So you may have a car come in that has more than one problem, and so you just need to kind of divide and conquer the car to figure out what's going on. There are many reoccurring issues with these cars, some that I've listed here. So if you learn the symptoms and the fixes of them, you've got pretty much probably 75% of the Prius figured out. Just, the big 3 problems: the battery, the brake actuator, instrument clusters, head gaskets, EGR problems, stuff like that. These are reoccurring problems. They happen all the time, and they normally happen at certain mileages, so you can kind of figure out exactly what's going on per age, per car. And so you want to rely on your TSBs, tech tips, and information from Identifix type services. And Identifix really is a great resource for these cars. So if you're a professional shop and you use Identifix, definitely Identifix every Prius problem that you get, because 9 times out of 10, it's a common problem that maybe you haven't heard of, but if you work on these cars long enough, you'll get to know every problem these things have. So you want to take a longer test drive, and this is me sitting, this is a 2010. I had just replaced the brake actuator in this car, and I'm sitting there going through the steps to get that working again. But Longer test drive, you definitely want to get this car. It takes longer to heat this vehicle up because the engine's not running all the time. You need to go through, the whole battery cycle. If you put a whole battery in, you need to discharge and charge all the way up. You got to understand the faulty system before attempting to do the repair, okay? You have to know how this stuff works, and you don't need to assume anything. Don't assume this car works like a normal car, and don't assume it doesn't. You need to get into the service information and find out exactly how the system works, okay? Genuine Toyota parts should be used. Many aftermarket parts have very high failure rates and will cause comebacks. Definitely do not use aftermarket inverter pumps, water pumps for the engine, stuff like that. It's just easier to bite the bullet and buy the Toyota part. Buy once, cry once, and have the car fixed. Especially if this is a customer's car, do not cheap out on parts for the car. Special tools, okay? I need 00 rated lineman gloves with leather protectors for high voltage work. So whenever I've got a panel off in the car, battery panel, battery cables for the traction battery, anything like that, I'm going to have these gloves on, and I'm testing for voltage before I put my bare hands on them. And so the 00 rated lineman gloves, you can get these from Grainger, a couple of other places. Any electronic supply shop should have these. And of course, you need to get them tested from time to time to make sure that the gloves are still airtight and certified. I have Cat 4 rated multimeter with high quality leads. You want to at least go Cat 4. There are times where this car may generate more power than a Cat 3 meter can hold. There is also something called a Megger insulation tester for testing high voltage insulation leaks. Unless you're getting really deep into the repair of these vehicles, I wouldn't really invest in a Megger. If you're just an average everyday person trying to fix their car, definitely not, because they start at about $1,000 and they go up from there. Insulated toolkit for high voltage battery repairs. You can get these fairly cheap from time to time at Home Depot, Lowe's, stuff like that. But when you're working on internal battery parts and things like that, you want to use insulated tools. TechStream software, you can get the TechStream software. I think you can get it on eBay with the cable, load that up to your computer, and you've got a whole Toyota TechStream in your hand. That works really well. TechStream does have a little bit of a learning curve to it, but there's plenty of videos showing you how to use it online. And at minimum, get you a Dr. Prius app and the Bluetooth adapter. The Bluetooth adapter, use the one that Dr. Prius tells you to use, because you can get some ones that don't work. But the app is free. You can pay a little extra, and it gives you the battery test and the longevity test to tell you the percentage of your battery left. From what I can tell, that's fairly accurate. I have a lot of people that comment that they use Dr. Prius, and I have it downloaded. But normally, if I'm testing one of these vehicles, I use one of the scan tools that I use here. I use an Autel Maxisys or a Snap-on Zeus scan tool. There's also plenty of resources out there. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and tout my YouTube channel. I have a lot of Prius repair work on there as well. Also, I just bought a Lexus CT200H. I'll be doing some videos on as well, which is the same driveline as a Gen 3 Prius. But AC/DC high voltage training, it's fixhybrid.com. There's a guy, Craig Van Battenberg, which is, I've taken some of his coursework and I used some of his materials to study for the ASE L3 hybrid test. And so there's some good stuff on there. There's some free stuff on there he'll give you as well. Stick to the Prius groups on Facebook. There's a lot of, I'm a contributor to many of those groups. I post my videos on there, but there's a lot of people on there that really don't know what they're talking about either. So you've got to be kind of careful who you get your information from. And of course, you have online forums that are old as cars are. Prius Chat is one online, and there's a lot of just general car stuff. Reddit's got a lot of subreddits that have the Prius topics on it as well. So just this information isn't as free as on a normal car. So you have to really look for the information when it comes to this stuff. But most of the common problems you will find solutions on online. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, comments, or if I made a mistake in this, I worked pretty hard on this, but if I did make a mistake on this, just leave me a comment. Just let me know exactly what you thought I did wrong. If there's anything else y'all need, I'm in the comments. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, VK. Just look for Auto Scholar Mr. B. And of course, I'm always on YouTube. So if you learned anything from this, please like the video and of course, subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you next time on Auto Scholar with Mr. B.